All right, the skinny on fats, triglycerides in particular, and insulin resistance. Do you care? Is it a fancy word that's nothing more than an obnoxious nuisance to you when you talk to your doctor? I think it's more than that, and it's pretty easy to address, but I want you to know the story so you have some self-awareness and you can start taking care of yourself. That's the whole point of everything I do here in these videos. When I work with clients, yeah, they spend money on labs because I'm a big believer in labs and they get a great interpretation. You don't need to go that route. So we're slicing it off little piece at a time so you can start to learn what you need to do and then make some changes. It really is that simple. Truth number 9, triglycerides and insulin resistance and fats. Triglycerides is a fat, so what's that about? Remember, seed oil, linoleic acid, and the whole gang is here again. We're going through, looking at triglycerides and insulin resistance. HOMA-IR above 1.4 is insulin resistant. Omega-6, 3, omega-6, and omega-3. Levels of analysis. First the ratio, then separately, and then the components. And they're always going to be divided into insulin resistant group and non-insulin resistant group because I believe there are really only 2 groups of people in the world metabolically. Healthy, non-insulin resistance, and by degrees unhealthy, insulin resistant. So which are you? All right, triglycerides and the omega-6, 3 ratio. Well, let's just put it out there. Here's triglycerides going up here, pretty straightforward. And here's the ratio down here. So these are terrible ratios to have. You want the 1-to-1, which is really over here, not even on this trend graph, scatter plot. The 1-to-1 was the Paleolithic, that's the ideal. Some people think now in this world, hey, just get them to 4 and we're good. You choose. But I think you ought to know it's a range, it's a ratio, and the ancestral understanding behind it may incline that 4 is good. If you can get to 4, that's great. If you can get to 3, that's good too. If you can get to 1, that's a lot of work, but if you have a healthy diet and you're enjoying life and 1-to-1, you've killed it, meaning you've done really well. Okay, so the big picture, looking at the ratio is only partly helpful. You need to go deeper. Obviously, triglycerides, well not obviously, but maybe you didn't know that, triglycerides go up as your ratio gets worse. So worse ratio, higher triglycerides. Triglycerides probably are not that good. Good point. Okay, so omega-6, who's doing it? Is the high 6 or high 3 and what's going on? So when we look at omega-6 right here, going up the left-hand side, and triglycerides across the bottom in both cases, we find higher omega-6 equates to lower triglycerides. Higher omega-6 goes a low omega-6. Perish the thought, you will have lower triglycerides. And here's an insulin-resistant person. Certainly it's very true, and it's a very steep slope, so it's much more effective. And here's the insulin-resistant group. Still has the same effect, it's just not as dramatic, just not as steep. Okay, over here, what about omega-3? So the omega-3 are far more effective at lowering triglycerides. We know that. There's I don't know about a gazillion, but maybe there's half a gazillion research papers that say, hey, omega-3 fish oils drops triglycerides. Always been the case. It's true, but I want to go a little deeper than that. But here's to show you that milestone, right? Pretty straightforward. It's almost the same line. Slightly steeper if you're non-insulin resistant, but pretty steep for insulin resistant people. There you go. So the higher your omega-3, and they don't have to be very high, will drop your triglycerides pretty profoundly and very quickly. All right, so it's time to talk about heart disease and linoleic acid. That's what everybody says, heart disease. You know, it's bad stuff. You shouldn't be around it. You know, don't even be in the same room with it. Get out. So opposing views around linoleic acid, and this is from a paper down here. It came out in 2018. It's a pretty well-known paper. So it's called Omega-6 Vegetable Oils as Driver of Coronary Heart Disease. Oh my. The Oxidized Linoleic Acid Hypothesis. September 2018. There's the link. You can look it up. Probably put it in the show notes as well. So why linoleic acid reduces the risk of heart disease, and down here is why linoleic acid increases the risk of heart disease. So he did a meta study, looked at other people's studies and says, here's the reasons, it's like, here's the reasons against it, here's the reasons for it, you decide. He's definitely against it. And I said, we can look at this and see what is correct about this paper and what is not. And it's worth going through. So why linoleic acid reduces the risk of coronary heart disease? It says, well, it reduces total cholesterol and it reduces LDL. We're going to check to see if that's true. But they don't know from the studies they got this, that it reduces heart disease. What they're saying is because it does lower cholesterol, total cholesterol, and it does lower LDL, this is the assumption, it therefore should, will, and has lowered total cholesterol, coronary heart disease. I disagree. I'll show you why I think it. So this completely is a little bit outdated, and thank goodness we can measure it and get the answer ourselves from my data, actually. Why linoleic acid increases the risk of coronary heart disease. It is because of increases susceptibility of LDL cholesterol and other lipoproteins to oxidation. Well, we can measure that as well through another ratio of triglycerides and HDL ratio. So it's pretty straightforward. We're going to get into that. It says in this paper, the reason it's bad is because it makes small dense LDL, and that's it is bad. It reduces HDL, that's also not a good thing to do, and it increases triglycerides. So in other words, it actually increases the triglyceride HDL ratio, which is not a good thing. All right, we'll look at that, and here's the paper. Take these one at a time. Why linoleic acid reduces the risk of heart disease and reduces total cholesterol and LDL. Remember this? We just went through this in the last video. Higher linoleic acid is the only omega-6 fatty acid associated with lower LDL. And so from my data, and any doctor's data, should they do this, should have the same results. So I'm pretty sure about that. So here we have linoleic acid, but it only decreases. So as we have increasing linoleic acid over here on the left, we will have a correlation to lower cholesterol. Higher linoleic acid correlates with lower LDL only in non-insulin resistant people. It's not true in insulin resistant people. So that's why these studies are kind of one size fits all, are, in my view, rather ignorant and very incomplete and lazy. It's just the way it is. It's kind of marketing. They're trying to market you a perspective. They want to give you enough supposed data to have you be fearful enough to go get a statin. All right? So there you go. Terrible thing to say, but that's the way it goes. All right, so here we go. Here's linoleic acid, just broken out a little cleaner for non-insulin resistant people. It's the only category of people that have lower LDL, non-insulin resistant people. Insulin resistant people actually increase their LDL as their linoleic acid. Nobody told you that. Okay, what about arachidonic acid? Arachidonic acid, doesn't matter who you are, what you do, it increases your cholesterol. It increases your cholesterol faster for non-insulin resistant people, a little more slowly, but the trend is the same in both cases. So it's only true for non-insulin resistant people. All right, that was the first part. So what do we say? That's partly true and partly not true. Take these one at a time. Why linoleic acid increases the risk of coronary heart disease. It increases LDL and other lipoproteins oxidation. It increases the small dense LDL. You'll see this in a second. It reduces HDL, increases triglycerides. These are all measurable. This can be verified by comparing linoleic acid to the trig-HDL ratio. Let's do it. If this is information that you want more videos on, or some sort of elaboration, and maybe it's not enough to do an entire another video or a series and so on, these take a lot of time, as you can see. Why don't you just buy me a cup of coffee, and there's a link below for that, and ask me what your question is, and I can address it. It's a great way to simply get a simple answer on something. If it's something more complicated, I'll let you know. I use my research to basically answer people's questions. Certainly that in my clinical experience over a couple of decades. But primarily, this whole new world of looking at lots of data and seeing the relationships has been invaluable to so many people, clients specifically, and to me, and to see what we can do. So if you have a specific question because I've talked about a particular supplement or labs or what labs to get, and sometimes you think, oh, I can't afford these labs. Actually, most of the labs that I talk about are well under $50 for 3 or 4 or 5 of them. But I would encourage you to get involved, contact me, buy me a cup of coffee, let me know what your question is, but in the very least, let me know you value this information. Okay, so here we go. Give a little explanation here. So NMR is about a $500 test, and what that does, it's called nuclear magnetic resonance, and it will basically show you the size of your cholesterol particles, right? Are they small or are they large? And so you get a report that basically says you're pattern A or you're pattern B. You actually have small oxidized, which is not what you want, little particles, and who cares, but that says what this is. And so what I'm showing you here, the number of studies that correlate the triglyceride HDL ratio to the NMR. This is a cheap test, only 2 tests, and you can get the same results. So what I'm showing you here, the 1-to-1 ratio, trigs to HDL is right here, which is very good to have that. And down here, 12 would be a bad ratio. So I put bad. And so as you move from good to bad, you have more and more small, these are all the production of your small oxidized LDL. But at the same time, if you have 1-to-1 ratio, or as you move in the opposite direction, you get more large and buoyant, they call it. I call them fluffy, but buoyant. You get large, so it's really a size difference. Now you know that, that's the inside secret. Now let's compare it. So we have linoleic acid to triglyceride HDL. Here's the 1-to-1 I just showed you. And as your linoleic acid increases, what do we find? Your triglyceride HDL ratio decreases. So it sounds like a good thing, right? So they're saying that sounds pretty good. And I said, not as expected. It increases, so what we're seeing is trig HDL ratio, bad's over here, good's over here. And this is saying as you increase your linoleic acid, it increases for this is everybody, undifferentiated. If you just saw this graph, you go, that looks pretty good to me. And it looks like it's going up to the left, and it is going up to the left for everybody. We're going to break it down. So if you just had to look at this, you go, looks good. Increased linoleic acid, I have a better trig HDL ratio, works for me. Now let's break it down into green is non-insulin resistant people, non-IR, and red is IR. What do we see? Well, the good part was only for, as we've already kind of discovered in other ways of looking at it, for non-insulin resistant people. Non-insulin resistant people can increase their linoleic acid kind of up to that average number. We've looked at the average number was really between 25, 26 around here. And this is kind of what this shows. So for non-insulin resistant people, bringing it up to the mid-range, perfect. Beyond that, I don't think so. But here's insulin resistant people, it's not working for them at all. You increase any linoleic acid, they're going to have a worse HDL ratio. So it's a different story for insulin resistant people, know that. It's not what we expected. This is the good news was, it's not what we expected for non-insulin resistant people. Think for a second, we have two groups of fats, right? Omega-6, we've been through this before. We're looking at linoleic acid and arachidonic acid, but there's a lot more. But if we were just to add these two together, they represent about 91 to 95% of all omega-6. So it's a pretty good bet that we can use those, and yeah, we can talk about all these other ones and their values and what they do, but they are much smaller. In terms of omega-3s, we're just looking at EPA and DHA. There's others. They represent maybe, call it around 70, 75%. Still a majority, not as strong as the percentage as the others were in omega-6. Let's compare. Triglycerides to omega-6, what do we see? Omega-6 up over here, and for both, we see a decrease in triglycerides. That's a good thing. So you add fats, I'm generalizing now, you add fats, your triglycerides go down. That's a truism in pretty much any polyunsaturated fat, any fat, even saturated fat actually as well, will drop your triglycerides. Increase your cholesterol, but they'll drop your triglycerides. Okay, what about omega-3? Is that any difference? It's actually much more acute and much more the same between non-IR and IR. They're pretty much one straight line. It's a little steeper for non-IR, but it's pretty much the same thing. So remember this, the omega-3 are far more effective at lowering triglycerides. We knew that EPA was the best there. Let's be more specific and see what fatty acid is the most effective of the omega-6 and of the omega-3. Is it arachidonic, linoleic, EPA, or DHA? Any guesses? Here's the answer right up front. All right, we're just going to pretend we're not going to see that right now. We'll look at omega-6, okay? Omega-6, linoleic, arachidonic, and we're saying as you increase, solid line is for non-insulin resistant people. So as you increase it for them, well, their triglycerides go back down. That's good. Pretty much is fat, adding fat is going to drop your triglycerides. Nothing too special. However, pretty much no effect at all for insulin resistant people. This is like, there's no relationship. That's pretty bad. But it's arachidonic acid, doesn't matter if they're insulin resistant or not, it's going to reduce their triglycerides. That's pretty cool. Eat all the animal meat you want, all the animal products you want, hopefully fish. So DHA is the most effective. Let's compare this. Here we have insulin resistance, IR people. So it doesn't matter who they are, EPA and DHA, both, as they increase, decrease your triglycerides. It's fat. It's just general rule of fat. Is there one more specific? So the most specific, the most effective at dropping their triglycerides is DHA. DHA is interesting because it represents 97% of roughly 97% of essential fatty acids in the brain, and it's about 40% of all fats in the brain. So it's a big brain player. So therefore, those who are kind of deficient in that, have greater chances of dementia, Alzheimer's, sarcopenia, so on and so forth. So now even a closer look. DHA, EPA, what do we see? Yep. So those people have the most benefit from omega-3 in general are non-insulin resistant people, but specifically it's DHA in non-insulin resistant people. DHA, the most effective right there. And they're not the same line. They're both going up, but it's dramatically more for non-insulin resistant people. That's a big deal. Now so what does that mean? Where does this come from? One thing about DHA and EPA, they're not separate products. They all come in the same food. You eat fish, you eat any sort of marine food, you're going to find it. So there is no such thing as a real whole food source out there of DHA only. There is no such thing as a real food source of EPA only. They're always together. The ratios are different, and we're going to talk about that in a second, but I just want to throw out what are some DHA-rich sources. These are marginally richer in DHA. All the salmons, we'll go with that in a second. Pacific herring in particular is high in both. But so what we're looking at is DHA, oysters, look at that, halibut, rainbow trout, so that's freshwater, mussel, shellfish. So we got shellfish, tuna, salmon, sardines, herring, mackerel. What I want to show here, I got this list of fish and seafood from this study. And this study was William Harris is the guy who's I think he's the president or CEO, very smart guy. I've referred to him before in other videos of Omega Quant. I like his videos. I like his work. It's transparent. So anyway, and here's the reference that he got these nutrient values from the USDA. So we're looking at this as EPA, DHA. I put it in a spreadsheet so I can manipulate it a little bit to make it a little more useful. So most sources of omega-3 have far more DHA than EPA. Mostly true, not completely true. Intakes of long-chain omega-3 fatty acids associated with reduced risk for death from coronary heart disease in healthy adults. That's true, and there's a study if you want to read about that. I'm just stealing the list. All right, so here's that list, and what I did is DHA-EPA ratio. Over here, right here, here's the ratio. This is me added it all up, and I got the ratio. So it basically says, look at cod has the highest DHA ratio, basically because it has hardly any EPA. So you can see it's quite a range. So now let's look down here. These have a greater EPA ratio. So now I did the EPA column, and the top one is Pacific herring, which I've never had Pacific herring. And it also is the top one to have a combined. So it's one of the few fish and marine sources that has higher EPA than DHA. So the point is they come together, and if you really want to be medical about it, you can say, if I eat oysters, what's my ratio? If I eat Pacific herring, what's my ratio? And what will that be? You need both. Now you know that I didn't go into how DHA is used a lot, but it's clearly very big in the brain and nerves. All right, these have the highest amounts of EPA and DHA combined. So the top of the list, Pacific herring, Atlantic herring, Atlantic wild salmon. I've never had that. We live on the Atlantic. Now, then second is farmed. Farm varies a lot, by the way. It depends on what they feed the farm. So it's kind of a questionable, but here's the ratio over here. There's the height. So that's how you can use that list and say, all right, if I'm going to have DHA-rich food, what would they be? I simply broke it down. Here's the highest EPA, there's the highest total, and here's the highest DHA. That's how I want you to think about seafood. Enjoy it, make it, but be part of your diet. It clearly is very important. And unfortunately, many fish are polluted, so you do have to worry about the mercury. So I tend to go, and we do have plenty of salmon in our freezer. I love shellfish, lived in Cape Cod for a while, so we got very much into the oysters. But make your choices. You can supplement as well, of course. So if this is something that you're interested in, that is a topic that I obviously go deeper in terms of labs, in terms of how to do it, in terms of why you would want to do it, various topics, as you've seen that I've done in the past, then please let me know below in a comment. Till then.